What if one body part could not only cost a champion a title, but also alter the way fans remember his entire reign? That's the uncomfortable question hanging over Phil Heath's legacy. Not whether he was great, that part is settled. 7 Mr. Olympia titles settled that. But the real question is harder. When people think of Phil Heath, do they remember the arms, the round muscle bellies, the freakish detail, the perfection that made him nearly unbeatable? Or do they remember the controversy? Do they remember the years of criticism and how it became hard to separate the champion from the flaw? This isn't the story of a man who was exposed as ordinary. It's the story of a man who was so close to bodybuilding immortality that even a small weakness became a global event. It's about how a physique that once looked untouchable became the center of one of modern bodybuilding's loudest debates. And it's about how Phil Heath's greatest battle wasn't just with Kai Green, Shawn Rhoden, or the judges. It was with a question that wouldn't go away. Was the most complete bodybuilder of his era losing control of the one detail that the sport couldn't ignore? To understand why that question became so explosive, we first need to look at Phil Heath at his peak. From 2011 to 2017, Phil Heath owned the Mr. Olympia stage, 7 straight titles. Each year, he brought a physique that many considered nearly perfect for the modern era. Massive, yes, but also round, full, deeply separated, and polished to survive almost any comparison. By the end of 2017, he had tied Arnold Schwarzenegger's 7 Olympia victories and was just 1 title away from tying the all-time record of 8, held by Lee Haney and Ronnie Coleman. On paper, the path was clear: win 1 more, and the conversation shifts forever. Win 2. And maybe the debate is over. But bodybuilding is brutal in a very specific way. It doesn't care about last year's dominance or how perfect you looked in 2014. It doesn't care about how many trophies are already sitting in your house. When you step on stage, the body in front of the judges is the only truth that matters. This is why Phil Heath's controversy hit so hard. It didn't happen to a fading veteran clinging to relevance. It happened to the reigning champion. It happened to a man chasing history. And when a champion shows even the smallest visible flaw, that flaw stops being a detail. It becomes a headline. The phrase bubble gut became shorthand in online discussions, repeated so often it almost lost its meaning. But behind that slang was a simple visual complaint, a midsection that looked too protruding, too hard to keep tight, too disruptive to the flow of an otherwise elite physique. By 2018, Phil Heath's abdomen had become a point of concern. Commentary from judging voices kept returning to the same problem. His stomach was becoming harder to control and harder to ignore. In bodybuilding, this mattered more than casual fans might realize. Men's open judging revolves around quarter turns, mandatory poses, and side-by-side comparisons. One key pose is the abdominals and thighs, but judges and audiences don't just see a pose for 1 frozen second. They see how an athlete transitions into it, holds it, and how the torso looks under fatigue, lights, and pressure. In a sport decided by comparison, a visible midsection issue doesn't stay isolated. It colors the entire presentation. That's why the controversy grew beyond one bad screenshot or an unflattering angle. Fans weren't just arguing about whether Phil was still huge. Of course, he was. They were debating whether sheer muscle could cover up a waistline problem on the world's biggest stage. The issue wasn't just cosmetic anymore, it was structural. What makes this story more complicated is that Phil Heath's midsection issue didn't appear in a vacuum. After winning the 2017 Olympia, he underwent double hernia surgery just a week later. In his own words, he felt something was off, but he wasn't sure how much it affected his performance. He also described the aftermath, going from winning the Olympia to not being able to carry his own luggage, operating at a fraction of his usual strength. This doesn't automatically explain every criticism, but it does shift the narrative. Because now, the story isn't just about aesthetics. It's also about durability, recovery, and the physical and emotional strain of maintaining a dominant physique. Then came 2018. The 8th title was supposed to be the coronation. Instead, it became the turning point. In Phil Heath's retelling, the weekend started with confidence, but by prejudging, he started to unravel. Criticism was coming from inside his circle, even from his coach, Hani Rambod. The message was clear. The contest was closer than Phil expected. By the time he entered the finals, he felt there was a real chance he could lose. But he still didn't fully understand what had cost him the title. This matters because champions usually project certainty, especially when they're on the edge of history. But here was Phil Heath, not years later, but right after the contest, admitting that it felt like a slow fall. This is a completely different emotional frame. Suddenly, the image of the unbeatable Phil Heath cracked, and we saw something else. A man walking into the biggest show of his life, realizing in real time that the room may no longer belong to him. When the dust settled, Shawn Rhoden won the 2018 Mr. Olympia. Phil Heath finished second. Officially, that's all the record books need to say. But the reason this result shocked bodybuilding was that it felt like a verdict on more than just one night. Judging side commentary afterward made the issue clear. Phil's midsection was the main concern, and Shawn brought the better overall package. And in 2020, head judge Steve Weinberger would still say that Phil hadn't fully fixed the issue. Whether fans loved Phil or not, the message was unmistakable. The midsection problem was no longer just a background complaint. It had become central to the result. That's when the bubble gut conversation stopped being just internet noise and became legacy material. Once a visible flaw is tied to an actual Olympia loss, it's no longer just criticism. It becomes part of your career narrative forever. Phil didn't take this narrative quietly. After the 2018 loss, he pushed back against how some parts of the media handled the story. He argued that casual internet outlets were spreading negative stories for clicks. Once the title was lost, the conversation shifted. The internet wasn't asking if he would make history anymore. They were asking whether the warning signs had always been there. This is the cruel reality of social media backlash. A champion can spend years building dominance, and then one flaw, repeated across thumbnails, comment sections, and reaction videos, starts to define him more loudly than his victories ever did. Phil Heath didn't just lose a title. He became the face of a larger bodybuilding debate. Had the sport become too focused on size while sacrificing aesthetic control? What makes Phil Heath's story even more compelling is that behind the controversy was a man who had already been carrying far more than the audience knew. He spoke about the personal struggles, divorce, business problems, family issues, and the death of his father, while the public saw only the polished image of a champion holding trophies. He admitted that the period after competition was when he had to finally deal with the buried emotions instead of covering them up with training. This doesn't erase the criticisms, but it does provide weight to the story. Behind the debate over his midsection was a man living through physical and emotional strain, while the sport demanded perfection. And perfection is the one thing bodybuilding doesn't negotiate. By 2020, when Phil returned to the Olympia stage, the story had shifted. No longer obsessed with proving the judges wrong, he had begun framing the 2018 loss as part of his personal growth. At the 2020 Olympia press conference, he said the best thing that happened to him was losing in 2018. It gave him the chance to recover, master himself as a man, not just a bodybuilder. Yet, despite this shift, the controversy remained. Officially, he finished third behind Big Ramy and Brandon Curry, and judging commentary suggested his midsection problem hadn't improved enough to change the outcome. Once a flaw survives a comeback, it stops feeling temporary. That's when legacy gets complicated. Because Phil Heath's Ursum is still absurd. 7 Sandos, one of the most dominant runs in history. On achievements alone, he's permanently in the highest room of bodybuilding greatness. But legacy isn't just about titles, it's also about memory. And Phil Heath's legacy is now twofold: the champion with the perfect physique, and the man whose midsection became the most debated part of his era. Maybe that's why Phil Heath remains such a fascinating figure. His story isn't easy to flatten into one simple narrative. He wasn't a fraud. He wasn't finished. He was a legend whose greatest flaw became visible at the exact moment he was closest to becoming untouchable. His journey didn't just reshape bodybuilding, it forced fans to ask, what does greatness really mean?